Well, to help us continue our discussion on U.S.-China policy is Sourabh Gupta. He's Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-American Studies. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, as we saw in Trump's speech, he made this America First idea a real key part of his campaign and now also in his speech. How do you see that affecting U.S.-China relations?
I think there is scope for considerable damage in U.S.-China relations. In his America First policy, at least the economic component of that policy, the centerpiece of those included 7 points, 3 of which are directed against China. It's about bringing trade cases against China, naming them as currency manipulators, etc., etc. I am certain he was going to follow through, if not on day one, at some point of time early in his presidency. That's fair enough. Many of these issues can then go to the WTO to get adjudicated. But what happens if he then does not comply with verdicts which are not favorable to America? What happens if he just decides to take action for which there is certain sentiment in this town of banning state-owned enterprises from making acquisitions in this country? And we should also broaden out this picture a little larger because China is very highly integrated into Asian economic flows. And Donald Trump has penalized Asia's richest country, Japan, by opting out of TPP. One of its poorest countries, Vietnam, by opting out of TPP. One of its fastest growing, India, by saying that he's going to work against those H-1B work visa permits. So China is integrated in those trade flows. And if there's damage in those relationships, that will also hurt China too. So I mean, we are looking for an unsettled period going forward.
So essentially the potential for a lot of spillover, not just from China, but around the region.
Yes, absolutely. Considerable spillovers, and it could be dangerous. Sure.
Now, we touched on trade. A lot of people have been throwing the term trade war around as we keep hearing a lot of this very divisive rhetoric. And this is really affecting the two largest economies. So which industries do you think are most at risk if things don't improve?
At the Chinese end, and understandably, there is overcapacity in steel, in aluminium, etc. I'm sure there are going to be trade cases which have already been brought and will, furthermore will be brought. But what if he decides to have an across-the-board tariff rise, which could hurt a lot of industries on the Chinese side because they are in those value chains which then export to the U.S. At the U.S. end also, there is scope for peril. Of course, we know Boeing and civil aircraft can obviously be a target. We know agriculture can be a target, and that's why Governor Terry Branstad was going to have a delicate balancing role between Trump and President Xi. He's a friend of both, but he'll have to manage that. But also think of these things, think of it that if the U.S. under Trump were to take some very drastic or rude actions against China on the economic front, there are areas where China also has leverage, like on rare earths, etc., where it has a sort of production monopoly at this point of time, and which is rare earths is an integral part of IT production chains. What if it has a de facto embargo? I mean, we can be talking about chaos out here.
And clearly this is something a lot of American businesses should be paying attention to. And we know that they've voiced their concerns, saying that what Trump does would make it harder for them, not just in general, but even to operate in China. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they're absolutely correct. And, you know, U.S. businesses are having already a hard time in China. Part of that reason is China is itself gravitating from a manufacturing-led economy to a more services-led economy. So there's a whole regulatory overhaul happening in many services sector. That's why you have in the area of cyber, in the area of anti-monopoly laws. It's not that easy writing regulations in the services sector, and American businesses are having difficulty in cracking those. But also think about it. U.S. and China have been negotiating a bilateral investment treaty. American business has pushed that hard. This would be a groundbreaking development if it can come through. But if the politics and economics of this relationship really spiral downwards, things like a BIT, which is a real treasure to have, would obviously not come through, and businesses will be hurt on both sides, including American business.
And are you surprised that someone who's supposed to be such a pragmatic businessman will perhaps take this route against one of the biggest trade partners and risk really damaging some businesses here?
For anybody else, I would have said no, but I would have to say with regard to Trump, even though he has been a businessman, it has been a core part of his worldview right since the 1980s, which he has been voicing, that Asian allies, primarily Japan at that point of time, and its trading partners, their security is underwritten, or the stability of the geopolitics of that region is to some extent underwritten by the U.S. this turns out to be a strategic enabler for them to engage in trade policy deceit against the US, and that they do not offer reciprocity on the trade and economic front. He has held this core worldview from the 1980s, and he won the election on that worldview. He is not going to surrender that easily, no matter how much on the other issues he caters to the Republican 1%. On this issue, he is very populist, and I really fear that he is hell-bent on this front, and so there is going to be turbulence in the relationship.
Now let's also look at sentiment of Chinese firms when it comes to investing in the US. What do you think the mood is then in light of what they're hearing?
Apprehensive, obviously. Chinese firms have been going out for a couple of years now. They have mostly gone to emerging markets, Africa, Latin America, and some of the secondary European markets. They would like to go to Western Europe, and they'd like to come to America and make acquisitions and big purchases. But we've already seen, the United States has this vetting system. It's called Cepheus Committee on Foreign Investment in the US. It's a very liberal body, and in the 25 or 30 years of its existence, it has just penalized a few of the transactions.
Right.
Of late, 2 of them have been Chinese transactions which have been penalized, and there is talk in the city of Chinese semiconductor acquisitions in the US semiconductor industry should not be allowed to happen, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a great degree of apprehension, but we must also understand, yes, SOEs are making these purchases in the West and are seen as a threat, but remember, SOEs are also huge purchasers of Western goods in the Chinese market. This cuts 2 ways, so everybody should be a little aware and cognizant about this.
Definitely something people should take note of. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Sourabh Gupta, Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-American Studies. Thank you.